Hello, and welcome to this extension module in a series of modules for understanding Centerpoint assessment. This extension module is an optional module that gives an overview of evidence-centered design, the design process that Centerpoint uses to build all of its assessments. You can think of this as effectively an Assessment Literacy 101, or a primer for high-quality assessment when it comes to building assessments. When we think about assessments, we think about questions that are intended to actually measure learning. Take a look at this question. In which city did the Dodgers play? Now, if you're from Los Angeles, or you are a baseball fan, or you have certain access to parts of America's favorite pastime, you might know that this question is that they play in Los Angeles. Now, if you don't know those things, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not fair. I don't really know much about baseball or care about baseball, and this question doesn't really reflect any learning I've done or any intelligence I might have acquired over the course of my life. And that would be true. The fact is that this question showed up in a post-World War I intelligence battery. At the time, the Dodgers were in Brooklyn. Recent immigrants to the United States from Eastern Europe, unfamiliar with the sport of baseball, got the question wrong. And in a series of questions like this, inferences were made about Eastern Europeans that they had lower intelligence. The question didn't measure intelligence. It only measured how long one had lived in the USA, become acculturated to a popular pastime, where they might have lived, and many other factors that were rife with bias and sensitivity. The idea here is that we want to build assessments that actually measure instruction and learning. A high-quality assessment has two major components: evidence-centered design and universal design. The first question asks, is the assessment valid? Is it standards aligned? Is it rigorously balanced? Are the tasks appropriate for the types of claims we're trying to make about students? And is the material grade appropriate? Are we measuring the appropriate grade level content? The second question, is the assessment fair? Questions whether or not the content we've put into the assessment, the stimuli we've used, the items we've written are free of bias or sensitivity that might disadvantage people based on their identity or some other form of their background. Legibility and access also asks the question of, can all students answer the question without any barriers to fully representing what they do and don't know? We're going to focus on evidence-centered design for the remainder of this module. When it comes to evidence-centered design, what we look at, we start by beginning with a claim. What is the claim that we want to make about a student? Then we say, how can we collect evidence in order to support that claim? We typically call them evidence statements. And then lastly, what are the tasks that we can use to elicit specific evidence from the students in support of those claims? Typically, that means that we break down a claim into evidence statements, and we build tasks to specifically tell us that to make statements about students that we would like to. So for example, in the case of claims, you have your master claim for every grade level. In 6th grade math, you have your major, additional supporting, reasoning, and modeling claims. Our assessments over the course of the year will have a mixture of items to measure all of those. Most of them will be on the major content, as you would expect. But for every assessment or every progress check, there will be at least one reasoning, one modeling item. For the case of 6th grade ratios and proportion standards, let's use that as an example. We might break down one of those standards, 6 RPA 1, into a couple of different evidence statements. Students understand the concept of a ratio and use ratio language to describe a ratio relationship between two quantities. They can understand that a ratio such as 5/4 can be used to describe a ratio relationships, or a ratio relationship like 10/8 or 15/12. They also know that ratio language such as 5 miles for every 4 hours can also be used to describe a ratio relationship. So, in an assessment where 6 RPA 1 has been covered, in this case that's the first unit of the illustrative math curriculum for 6th grade, we might say, how can we pick a task that specifically tells us whether or not students can or can't do that? In the case of the Progress Check 1 for the 6th grade, we have 2 items that are intended to measure this standard and collect evidence for us. This first item that I'm going to show you has a tape diagram that represents that for every 3 tickets sold to a child to a movie, there are 2 tickets sold for adults. You then see that there are 5 options, and students have to select all that apply. The options B, D, and E are correct. I'll just give you a second to go ahead and review those. What you can see is that if students correctly selected all three options, it meant that they sort of comprehensively know the standard. They've demonstrated mastery of the evidence statements that we've created around the standard. That helps to support the claim that students have mastered ratios and proportions for the 6th grade. However, it doesn't fully state that. We have to collect more evidence over time, but this item itself collects a lot of that evidence. And the distractors, options A and C, do tell us some things about student misconceptions. So this item gives us either 3 affirmative options that students fully know a standard, or 2 options that can tell us a lot about their misconceptions. So when you look at the way that we've blueprinted the exam, we pick a number of items to support subclaims, like the major content, additional supporting. We then have at least 1 or 2 reasoning items per progress check. And then let's look specifically at a test map in RPA 1. There are 2 items to measure RPA 1. The first one uses a tape diagram, which supports another ratio and proportion standard. The next one uses a model, and students have to drag and drop. Collectively, those 2 items taken together can help support the claim that students know this standard. All of our items, delicately balanced over the course of an assessment, are intended to help support claims about standards for a specific grade level at the time that they've been taught. This is a little bit of a background behind our assessments. There's more information available to you if you'd like. Please reach out to your team at Montgomery County to gain that information. Thanks for listening, and we hope you guys have a great year using our assessments.